Before we begin, a brief disclaimer. This episode covers complex historical and geopolitical topics and a number of foreign names, places, and historical figures. If I mispronounce any names or location, that is unintentional. I have made a genuine effort to research, source, and fact-check the information presented in this episode using publicly available material. However, history and geopolitics are complex subjects and interpretations can differ. The purpose of this episode is to examine events and ideas, encourage discussion, and provide context, not to present myself as a final authority on the topic. If you're part of the honest and open conversations community, thank you. And if you're not yet, now's the time to join us, because this movement only gets stronger with every voice that stands with it. Now, on to today's podcast. In this podcast, we're not just talking about Iran in theory. We're talking about why the United States and Israel believe they are justified in dismantling the current Iranian regime. The US and Israeli leaders have framed their military actions as necessary to neutralize what they describe as an escalating threat: Iran's missile capabilities, its nuclear ambitions, and its long-standing support for armed proxy groups across the region. Their argument is simple. If a regime funds and arms militant networks, expands missile reach, and moves towards strategic and nuclear weapon capability, you don't wait for impact. You degrade the threat before it matures. They have also made clear that weakening the clerical regime could open space for the Iranian people to reclaim political control from the ruling mullahs. This is going to be a big point of this podcast. Whether you agree or disagree with that doctrine, that is the justification being put forward. Ignore the idiots talking about international law. International law is a farce. For the last 60 or so years has been destined to destroy Western civilization. A law that is not applied evenly is not a law. It's a way to control the masses. And international law has held the West to a higher standard than the rest of the world for decades. Remember, under international law, the necessary actions taken by Churchill and President Roosevelt would have been considered war crimes. That's not my take on Churchill and Roosevelt. They are heroes, because just as President Trump does, they knew the only ideology that matters when a threat faces your nation is force doctrine. Force doctrine dictates that a leader must do whatever they need to eliminate the enemy. Forget schools and hospitals being blown up. They are simply a regrettable casualty of war, which is why I believe that war should be the last resort. If every option is exhausted and war is all that is left, then war becomes the only option. If you look at this matter objectively, the United States of America and the Israelis have exhausted the options available to them, which is why they now find themselves at war. The only consideration then left is for a leader and nation's military to maximize the damage and eliminate the enemy while minimizing your own casualties. That's it. That is how simple force doctrine is. And our enemies, Russia, China, North Korea, all of our enemies calculate that equation every day. Unfortunately, because of a fairy tale story Western leaders have chosen to believe is fact, force doctrine is considered a thing of the past. It's not. It is very real and very current. The mistake the Iranian regime made was thinking that President Trump was a weak leader, like the majority of Western leaders over the last 60 years. It's this weakness that prevented the West from being victorious in a war scenario since World War II. Now, I know some will say, what about the Gulf War? I would argue that if the Gulf War had been won, and truly won, we wouldn't still be mopping up the mess that is the Middle East. But to understand whether that justification holds weight, we need context, because modern Iran didn't appear out of nowhere. It is the product of ancient empire, foreign invasion, oil nationalism, revolution, and a deliberate strategy of proxy warfare. So before we judge the present, we need to understand the past. Let's go back. If you don't understand Persia before Islam, you won't understand nationalism. If you don't understand 1953, you won't understand 1979. And if you don't understand 1979, you won't understand the IRGC. So let's go back properly. Long before Alexander the Great, long before Islam, and long before Rome dominated the Mediterranean, the Iranian plateau was already home to advanced civilizations. In the southwest, you had the Elamites, a Bronze Age civilization with its own language, state structure, and urban centers going back to the 3rd millennia BCE. That is 2,000 to 3,000 years before Christ. From today, that is between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago. The plateau itself was not an empty desert. It was a mosaic of mountain tribes, pastoral peoples, and early agrarian settlements, and by the 2nd millennium BCE, Indo-Iranian groups began settling across the region. From those migrations emerged two names that matter: the Medes and the Persians. In the 7th century BCE, the Medes formed one of the first large Iranian political entities. They helped overthrow the Assyrian Empire, one of the great powers of the ancient world. This was not tribal chaos. This was organized statecraft. But it was under the Persians that something bigger emerged. Around 550 BCE, Cyrus the Great unified the Persians and the Medes. He founded what became the Achaemenid Empire, the largest empire the world had seen at the time. From the Indus Valley to Egypt to Anatolia to the edges of Europe. Here is a modern map that shows the boundaries of the Achaemenid Empire. Take note, the boundaries of the Achaemenid Empire stretch much further than that of the boundaries of modern-day Iran. Persia was not a small kingdom, it was a continental superpower. And here's what made it different. It governed through administrative sophistication. It allowed religious diversity. It used satraps, provincial governors. It integrated rather than annihilated local cultures. And religiously, the dominant ethical framework was the Zoroastrianism, centered on moral dualism, truth versus falsehood, and cosmic order versus chaos. This wasn't a desert insurgency culture. It was an imperial civilization. Then came Alexander of Macedon, or Macedonia, as some people call it. Between 334 and 330 BCE, it shattered the Achaemenid Empire. Persepolis was burned to the ground. The Persian imperial structure collapsed. Iran entered the Hellenistic world. And now, you have to be careful here. The Iran discussed at this point means land of the Iranians, which was not Islamic, or what we consider Iran to be today. But Persian identity didn't disappear, it adapted. After Alexander's successors fractured his empire, Iranian power re-emerged under the Parthians, and later under the Sassanians. The Sasanian Empire, from 224 to 651 in the Common Era, restored Iran as a superpower, rivaling Rome and later Byzantine. Zoroastrianism became tightly integrated into state power. Persia and Rome fought for centuries. This was one of the great civilizational rivalries of antiquity. Then came another turning point, the Islamic conquest. In the 7th century, Arab Muslims' armies defeated the Sasanian state. Islam entered Persia through conquest. So yes, that is right. Muslims in Iran's history were colonisers, not unlike the English in Australia's case. The truth is this: human history is all about superior civilizations taking the land of lesser civilizations or peoples, as you can see so far from this podcast. The Islamic argument that Islam was the native peoples of the Middle East is nonsense. The only way both Islam and the Australian Aboriginals' claim of native persons can be believed is if you cherry-pick history and stop looking at history at the time that suits your argument. This is why I've never thought much of that argument, and frankly, that type of cherry-picking and deliberate manipulation of the facts required to mount such an argument is only the type of lunacy that can arise from academia. Here is the cold, brutal facts of the situation. The only land humans can lay claim to is specific parts of Africa. Every other piece of land has been colonised. That should end this native claim argument, but it won't, because these groups need victimhood to explain poor behaviour. Now back to Iran. But here's what matters. Persia was not erased. Persian language survived. Persian administration survived. And Persian culture, identity survived. Islam was absorbed and Persianized. Over time, Iran became predominantly Muslim, and eventually predominantly Shia Muslim. That sectarian development matters later. In the 16th century, Safavid dynasty made Twelver Shiism the official state religion of Iran. This was huge. It hardened Iran's identity as a Shia power, surrounded by Sunni powers like the Ottoman Empire. That sectarian line is still geopolitically visible today. Fast forward to the 19th century. Iran is ruled by the Qajar dynasty, but the country is weak. The once powerful Persian state has fallen behind the rapidly industrializing powers of Europe. Russia presses southwards, Britain presses northward from India. Iran became a strategic buffer between empires. Concessions are handed out, foreign companies are gained control over trade routes, infrastructure, and eventually natural resources. Economic control slowly slips outward, and inside Iran, resentment grows. In 1907, Britain and Russia formalized what had already been happening informally. They divided Iran into spheres of influence. The north falls under Russian dominance, the south under British influence. Iran remains technically sovereign, but strategically compromised. For many Iranians, this period is deeply humiliating. A civilization that once ruled an empire stretching from Egypt to India now finds itself treated as geopolitical pawn. That humiliation burns into Iranian political consciousness. In 1906, pressure from merchants, clerics, and reformers forces the Qajar monarchy to accept something new, a constitution, and a parliament known as the Majlis. This moment is important. It represents one of the first attempts in the Middle East to create a constitutional political system, balancing monarchy, religion, and representative government. But the system is fragile. Foreign powers continue to interfere during World War I. Internal divisions weaken the state, and the constitutional experiment struggles to stabilize the country. In the early 20th century, another figure emerges, a military officer named Reza Khan. In 1921, he leads a coup. Within a few years, he crowns himself Reza Shah Pahlavi, founding the Pahlavi dynasty. His vision is clear: modernize Iran, centralize power, build infrastructure, reduce foreign influence. Under Reza Shah, Iran undergoes rapid transformation. Railways are built, industry expands, education systems are modernized, and the state becomes stronger. But so does authoritarian rule. Reza Shah governs as a modernizing strongman. Then World War II changes everything again. World War II and another occupation. In 1941, Britain and the Soviet Union invaded Iran. Their goal is simple: secure supply routes into the Soviet Union during the war. Reza Shah is forced to abdicate. His son, Mohammad Reza Shah, takes the throne. And once again, foreign powers reshape Iranian leadership, and once again, Iranian resentment deepens. By the early 1950s, another issue dominates Iranian politics: oil. British-linked companies control most of Iran's oil production through the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. Many Iranians believe the country is receiving only a small share of the profits generated from its own resources. In 1951, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalizes the oil industry inside Iran. The move is hugely popular. It is seen as a reclaiming of national sovereignty. But in London and Washington, the move triggers alarm. Britain imposes economic pressures. Tension escalates. Then, in 1953, Mossadegh is removed in a coup. Declassified documents later confirm the operation involved British intelligence and the CIA. For many Iranians, this event becomes a defining moment. It reinforces a powerful narrative. Whenever Iran attempts to assess independence, outside powers intervene. That belief shapes Iranian politics for decades. After the coup, the Shah consolidates power. His government launches a series of reforms, known as the White Revolution. Land reforms, industrial development, expansion of education, greater rights for women. Iran begins to modernize rapidly. But political repression grows alongside it. The Shah's secret police, Savak, aggressively suppress opposition. Many religious leaders, intellectuals, and political activists view the Shah as authoritarian and overly aligned with Western powers. By the late 1970s, dissatisfaction is widespread. Economic problems, political repression, cultural tensions all begin to converge. In 1978, protests begin spreading across Iran. At first, they are small. Then they grow. Within months, they become a nationwide movement. In early 1979, the Shah leaves the country, and a religious leader who had spent years in exile returns. Khomeini. Yes, that Khomeini. A referendum establishes a new system, the Islamic Republic of Iran. That is not just a change in leadership, it's the creation of a new political model. A system where religious authority and state power are fused. At the center of this new state sits one institution that becomes enormously powerful, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. Is not just a military force, it is a political, economic, intelligence-based, ideological. It exists to defend the revolution and the Islamic political system that emerged in 1979. Over time, it grows into one of the most powerful institutions in Iran, and it becomes a central actor in how Iran projects influence within and beyond its borders. Understanding that history matters, because modern Iran did not emerge in isolation. It is the product of ancient empire, foreign intervention, revolution, and the creation of a state built around a specific ideological and political structure. But the story of the Islamic Republic doesn't stop with the revolution, because almost immediately the new government was thrown into a war that would define its identity. In September 1980, Iraq's leader Saddam Hussein invaded Iran. His calculation was simple. Iran had just gone through a revolution. Its military was disorganized. Its political system was unstable. It looked like the perfect moment to strike. But the invasion triggered something very different. Instead of collapsing, the new Iranian regime mobilized. What followed was an 8-year war, one of the longest conventional conflicts of the 20th century. Cities were bombed, chemical weapons were used. Entire generations of young Iranians were sent to the front lines. And during that war, something critical happened inside Iran. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps expanded rapidly. It became not just a military organization, but a political force, an economic power, and the ideological defender of the revolution. By the end of the war in 1988, the Islamic Republic had survived its greatest external threat, but it had also transformed itself. The state became more militarized, more security-focused, more convinced that it existed in a hostile world where survival depended on strength and vigilance. That wartime mentality still shapes Iranian strategy today. There's a simple way historians often explain the modern Middle East. Think of it as a triangle of power. On one side you have the Sunni Arab states, on another Persian Shia Iran, and on the third Israel, backed by Western alliances. Most of the region's conflicts, alliances and proxy wars can be understood by watching how these three poles interact. Once you see that structure, the modern Middle East suddenly makes a lot more sense. Now we need to go back to one of the points I just raised. The Iranian people voted for the mullahs. This is a prime example of democracy. People got what they voted for. This is why when a person claims they don't care about politics, it is deeply misguided. The mullahs and the current Iranian state, as we know it, like Hamas in Gaza, were voted in by their people. And in Iran's case, they turned a country from a respectable nation into a third world nation that it is today in less than 50 years. If it can happen in Iran, it can happen here in Australia, or the West more widely. The only way to prevent your country from becoming a third world nation is to have quality politicians that are answerable to the people and that the people are well informed. Here in Australia, by my calculations, we're 30 years into our own decline. But back to Iran. Iran does not primarily project power through conventional invasion under the mullahs. It projects power through networks, training, funding, arming militias. In Lebanon, in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen. In Iraq, coalition forces publicly assessed that precision-made improvised explosive devices, components were being manufactured in Iran and smuggled to Shia militias. The Pentagon later assessed hundreds of American deaths tied to Iran-backed militants. Australia operated in that same theatre. Let me be disciplined. I'm not claiming Iran personally targeted Australian soldiers. I am saying that when you train, arm and equip militias who attack coalition forces, you are part of the operational ecosystem that produces those casualties. That's how proxy warfare works. The wider Islamic ideological movement, either directly or indirectly, is responsible for the maiming and killing of our Australian soldiers. And this alone should be justification to support our allies in the United States of America and Israel in this conflict. The common thread connecting ISIS, Hezbollah, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, and the current Iranian regime is not ordinary religious belief. It is Islam as an ideology that fuses religion and state power, rejects secular constitutional governance, and justifies violence in pursuit of political dominance. That is not about private faith. That is not about peaceful religious practice. This is about Islam as an ideology. It is a governing doctrine. It seeks theocratic rule. It rejects pluralism. It rejects liberal democracy, and in some forms, it sanctions violence as a legitimate political tool. That ideology is incompatible with Western civilization's focus is the primacy of the individual. Islam, like all tribal totalitarian collectivism, focuses on the primacy of the group. And that is why this matters deeply to Australians. Because the government's first and most sacred responsibility is the safety of its own people. When Islam as an ideology repeatedly produces terror attacks, radicalization networks, violent street mobilizations, and and transnational proxy warfare, it is no longer a theoretical debate. It is a national security issue. Australia cannot afford confusion on this. We must be able to say clearly, Islam is an ideology. The theocratic supremacist project has generated a disproportionate share of modern global terrorism. That is not hysteria. That is observable. Now, what does a responsible government do? It does not demonize religion, but it does confront extremism decisively. That means rigorous immigration screening for Islamic ideology, zero tolerance for support of Islam as an ideology, immediate deportation for non-citizens who engage in Islamic ideological activity, and severe criminal penalties for violent or terror-related crimes and those that support criminal behaviour in any way. Australian governments must stop the appeasement of intimidation tactics on Australian streets. In case you are wondering what appeasement of intimidation tactics on Australian streets look like, here is a clip.
No-go zone areas wouldn't be as bad as Europe just because. So I'm headed to an area called Lakemba in Sydney, Australia, and it's supposed to be a very high Muslim population area, kind of like Markslow or Molenbeek in Europe. I think that in Australia, the no-go zone areas wouldn't be as bad as Europe just because they've got less mass immigration. But I've heard some pretty bizarre stories about riots, about attacks, kind of grooming gangs in Lakemba as well. So I want to see what's actually going on there. Is this actually a no-go zone? Or is it integrating perfectly? The only way I get to know these things is if I go on the ground and check it out. So let's see what we find out in Lakemba. As soon as we arrived in Lakemba, things were tense. There were heads turning, people coming out of shops to look at us and find out what we were doing. Men started yelling in Arabic across the street at us. I hadn't even been in Lakemba 10 minutes before someone had tipped off the media, and they came running to combat me and tell me this was a perfectly safe area and I had nothing and no reason to be there. Almost immediately, the media story was proven to be wrong. As we went to go for a walk to the local mosque, a very high-ranked police officer came up to me and begged with me, do not go there.
Where's the...
Subanism?
Speaking.
Inspector Rick Ages from Campsie Police.
Yep.
I've been informed that you're intending to attending the Lakemba Mosque. Is that correct?
I actually have no intentions of attending. I was just planning on walking through the streets and seeing how the culture was here.
Yes.
Yep.
Are you satisfied with that?
Yep.
So where do you intend on walking to now?
I was just going to walk out and check how the mosque was.
Check where the mosque was?
Yep. Would I not be allowed to attend if I wanted to?
I've got grave concerns that you may cause an imminent breach of the peace down there, so I'm asking you not to attend.
Why would I cause a breach of the peace?
Because it's highly religious down there.
And would it be me causing a breach of the peace, or would it be the people there?
Well, your presence may cause them to be, be offensive and be objective to your attending there.
And so that would be them being offended by me.
Can you not interview me? The local community walk around here without any fear. I walk around here without any fear.
But I'm a critic of Islam.
Yes.
So I can't be in this multicultural because my culture is allowed to have free speech and criticize.
I understand you have your own beliefs and you're allowed to have your own beliefs. I have no issue with that. I'm asking you not to attend down there because I have a fear that you may cause an imminent breach of the peace. In doing so, you may commit an offence.
Am I allowed to walk through the area?
I'm asking you not to go down the Howden Street.
You're asking me, but do I have the legal right to walk down this area?
At this point in time, no.
I know you're walking away, but I would like to do some interviews. Would I be allowed to do interviews?
I'm not welcome in there.
No, I'm not. No, just to do interviews on the street. Am I allowed to?
No.
Why not?
Because I'm asking you not to.
Would I be allowed to, okay, no cameras, nothing. Would I be allowed to talk to people and criticize Islam?
No.
Why?
Because I'm telling you, no, you're committing an offence. Why do you need to do it here?
Because this is a highly Islamic area.
What questions do you intend asking?
Could I not talk to people and criticize Islam?
Question. Why do you want to criticize Islam? Like I said, if you're inside, I have fear that you're going to cause a breach of the peace.
No, you have fear people will be offended by me.
No, yeah.
Yes, thank you.
And you're committing a breach of the peace. I've given you that warning. And if you do that, you may be breaking the law. Do you understand that?
Yep, I understand it. I perfectly understand. As far as I'm concerned, you have Sharia law here. As far as I'm concerned. Yeah, we'll go to jail if we talk to people. As far as I'm concerned, they have Sharia law here. I was told if I talk to people, even if I put all my cameras away, I can't criticize Islam to people here on a public street in Australia, in Sydney. Don't tell me you don't have no-go zones. Don't tell me this is a multicultural country. Lakemba is a monoculture, and it is one that does not allow critique of Islam. It is one that does not allow free speech because it is conquered land.
That's right.
That's all right.
No, you guys,
I'm talking to them. It's,
they're going to fire up for no reason. You know how they are.
I know. How you doing? You're mocking my height, you? Let me ask you, were you at any of the Iranian protests? Hey, why?
Because we support many causes.
So you've been to the Iranian protests?
That's right.
That's all
No,
right.
you guys,
I'm talking to them. It's,
they're going to fire up for no reason. You know how they are.
I know how they are. Do you know how they are?
Well, we hear these protests every week, mate. Every week.
So you're not, so just to be clear, you're not worried about me. You're worried about my safety.
Yes.
I've been meaning for Rebel News in South Bank, Melbourne.
Protesters were gathering just nearby. They appeared to have some support, but when this couple gave protesters a piece of their mind, they were heckled, with police taking them inside a shop for their own protection. Police were also seen encouraging people of Asian appearance to head inside. The protesters made their way to Moore Park, where the tone shifted further.
And now we're being driven out of the land we built.
And when the mic was opened up to the audience, this man took the stage, launching into an anti-Semitic diatribe that the ABC's decided not to repeat. A short time later, he was arrested.
We will allege that the language he used, his presence, was clearly and unequivocally assigned with neo-Nazi ideology.
These type of occurrences, where police fail in their duty to protect innocent civilians who are exercising their civil liberties peacefully, because it's easier or more politically correct than to apply the law to violent criminals and thugs, cannot be accepted. This practice is an absolute dereliction of their duty. Just as military, federal governments and intelligence agencies can't accept the same behaviour on a global scale. Under President Trump and his administration, bully boy tactics are no longer tolerated, which is a substantial change in the status quo. If the Iranian regime collapses and its theocratical model weakens, that will send a message far beyond Tehran. It will demonstrate that the fusion of religion and state power enforced through violence will no longer be accepted. For Australia, that means something practical. Reduced external terror risk to Australians. Reduced radicalisation networks inside Australia. Greater social cohesion and less responsibility on taxpayers. Peace is not achieved through denial. It is achieved through clarity and strength. Whether you support President Trump, the United States, Prime Minister Netanyahu, or Israel itself, the justification being presented for this conflict has always been the same. Iran is viewed as a strategic threat. The argument from Washington and Jerusalem is straightforward. If Iran's ability to wage war is dismantled, and the clerical regime responsible for decades of regional destabilisation is removed, then the central engine driving proxy conflict across the Middle East disappears. In that scenario, Israel would no longer face the same level of sustained strategic pressure from Iran, which would mean far less ongoing military and financial backing from the United States would be required by Israel. Having a democracy as the dominant regional power means a more peaceful Middle East. Now, to be clear, that does not mean Israel would face zero threats. The Middle East remains a complex and competitive region. Other states still exist with their own strategic ambitions, and instability can always re-emerge if new actors attempt to fill a power vacuum. I think it can be argued that dismantling Iran's ability to project power could actually create the conditions for the United States to minimize its long-term military involvement in the region. In other words, resolve the central strategic threat now, and the need for constant intervention decreases later. But for Australians, this is not just a distant geopolitical debate. Australia has fought alongside the United States in the Middle East for more than 2 decades. So when Australians hear debates about Iran, Israel, and the United States, it is not simply someone else's conflict. It is part of the strategic environment Australia operates within. And that brings us back to the most fundamental responsibility any government has: the security of its people. Every decision in geopolitics eventually comes back to that single principle. You can debate the strategy, you can debate the timing, you can debate the consequences, but in the end, every leader faces the same question. Does this decision make our people safer or more vulnerable? That is the reality, and that is the standard every government is ultimately measured against. The Australian government, both Labor and the Coalition, along with the broader Parliament of Australia, have failed in their duty. Because they fail to understand reality. For the better part of 30 years, they have failed in their responsibility to keep Australians safe. The immigration of large numbers of supporters of Islam as an ideology has made Australia a less safe nation. And when the question is asked again, will the Australian government fail again? Unfortunately, they will. Because once you strip away the rhetoric, once you remove the political theatre, the problem becomes obvious. Australian governments fail to engage with reality because the mechanisms of accountability to the people were destroyed in exchange for ideological conformity. Here is a question. What does the Australian government and the Iranian government have in common? Neither is accountable to the people, and they use ideological-driven police and security forces to enforce their ideology. Which brings me to the questions that will shape the coming weeks and the coming months. The first question is the one dominating headlines right now. Are the actions taken by the United States and Israel justified? My view is clear. Given the strategic threat they face, they believe they are acting in defense of their national security. But the more complicated questions come next. Because if the Iranian regime were to fall, the future of Iran would ultimately rest in the hands of the Iranian people themselves. And that raises an uncomfortable question. What guarantees that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated? In 1979, millions of Iranians supported a revolution that ultimately produced the system that governs the country today. If political change happens again, what ensures a different outcome? Then there are the geopolitical questions. What role, if any, would outside powers play in rebuilding Iran? Could countries like Russia or China attempt to shape the outcome? Or would a new Iranian government seek alignment with a different set of international partners? There are also cultural and political questions. How would Iranian society balance its own deep historical identity with the demands of building a stable modern state? Would a future government prioritise national sovereignty above all else, or integrate more closely with the global political and economic system? Then there is a regional question. How would the surrounding Middle Eastern states respond to a new Iran? Would they see opportunity or a new source of uncertainty? And finally, the internal question. If a new government emerges in Iran, could it truly break with the entrenched political interests that have shaped the country for millenniums, or would old divisions simply reappear under new leadership? These are the questions no one can answer right now, but they are the questions that will determine what comes next. Because removing a regime is one thing, building a stable future afterwards is something far more difficult. So let's strip this right back This is not ancient hatred, not tribal mythology, not theology. This is a regime that has spent 45 years plus projecting instability beyond its borders, financing proxies, arming militias, expanding strike capability, leveraging nuclear potential. That is the behavior of a regime pursuing leverage through coercion. And coercion changes the equation. If a government openly defines you as the enemy, builds the means to act on it, and demonstrates willingness through proxies, you don't wait politely. You assess, you determine whether the deterrent still holds or whether delay increases the cost. That's the calculation being run in Washington and in Jerusalem. War should always be the last resort. But if the clerical regime collapses, the balance shifts, not because conflict disappears overnight, but because the escalation is removed. And that shift matters for Israel, for the United States, for Australia, for every soldier deployed into theatres shaped by that instability. You don't have to like the doctrine, but you do have to understand it. In geopolitics, power deters. You'll hear it's about money, influence, contracts, elections, and oil. Strip that away. The state exists for one foundational purpose, the security of its people. So the question becomes brutally simple. Are your citizens safer with that regime intact or without it? If neutralising that threat reduces long-term risk, the action is not vanity, it is responsibility. History does not reward narrative management, it rewards survival. That's the standard. This is honest and open conversations, unfiltered, unrestricted, unapologetic. The fight for truth isn't over, it's just getting started. And I want to thank every single one of you, our listeners, our followers, and especially our members. Your support is the reason this show exists. This platform was built for people like you, people who still believe in truth, courage, and having the hard conversations that matter.